Someone finally made an intense Type Moon iceberg chart. Let's get it on! Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai here. Iceberg charts have been around for a while now. At first, Fate and Type Moon at large didn't have a definitive iceberg to reference. Now, however, thanks to Tohazure on Reddit, we finally have a deep enough rabbit hole to go down. It's called the Ultimate Type Moon Iceberg, and I believe it. Tohazure did a fantastic job providing links and annotations to clarify each and every entry. You can find a link to the full iceberg in the description. For today's video, I will explain literally all of the concepts mentioned in this iceberg chart. To bolster it even further, I'll be adding in elements from an even earlier iceberg I found from Reddit user Apak Speech. The beauty of this exercise is discovering new and potentially mysterious things about a franchise that you really love, so I'm really excited for this one. If you enjoy this content, be sure to like, comment, share, and smash that subscription bell as if it were your waifu. Consider supporting the channel by becoming a member on YouTube or signing up via Subscribestar or Patreon. All three platforms offer the same perks, such as early access and exclusive content like my Lessons in Magecraft series. Without further ado, let's dive in. Sometimes iceberg creators will give fancy names to each of their tiers. The lower you go, the more obscure the entries. Since I'm working with two different charts of differing size, I'll categorize each tier by a depth ranking. We'll start at a depth of 1 and proceed through depth 9. As such, depth 1 will be pretty darn familiar. I'll try to zip through it as fast as possible. Obviously, Type Moon is a company known for its flagship visual novels, Fate Stay Night and Tsukihime. Their most successful venture is the mobile game Fate Grand Order. Collectively, these works make up a fictional multiverse named the Nasu-verse, named after Type Moon's lead writer, Kinoko Nasu. The illustrator behind most of his works is Takashi Takeuchi. They were friends from middle school, who officially formed Type Moon in the year 1999. Tsukihime was released in the year 2000, and due to its success, it received a spin-off sequel in the form of Melty Blood, a visual novel/fighting game developed in collaboration with Watanabe Seisakujo, now known as French Bread. Speaking of French Bread, Type Moon's 2004 release of Fate Stay Night introduced us to Saber, more properly known as Artoria Pendragon. Aside from being an awesome female King Arthur, she is endearingly known for her voracious appetite. Takeuchi is so fond of Saber's design that he's been known to draw many characters that share similar features. The fandom refers to these designs as Saber faces. In 2006, author Gen Urobuchi started publishing a light novel called Fate Zero that serves as a prequel to the original Stay Night. Later, in 2011, this novel was adapted into an anime by Studio UFO Table. While Stay Night was already popular in Japan, this anime is chiefly responsible for launching the Fate series toward international fame. Based on that popularity, UFO Table would go on to adapt 2 routes from the original Stay Night. Unlimited Blade Works was made into a full-on anime, while Heaven's Feel was adapted into a trilogy of movies. Even though Fate Zero is a prequel, many fans started the series with its anime, going on to see Unlimited Blade Works afterward. Visual novel purists take issue with watching the series in this order, as Zero spoils aspects of Stay Night. Personally, I'd argue Stay Night spoils parts of Zero as well, so there really is no objectively correct order to watch them. Oh, and I have an entire playlist of videos called Type Moon Lore, which covers most of this stuff in further detail, as well as recommends how to approach the Fate series. You can also find full live streams of Fate Stay Night, Hollow Ataraxia, Tsukihime, and the main FGO storyline. Again, check the description. This chart lists Gigguk, which I assume is how a lot of newbies are finding out about Fate, since he's such a huge AniTuber. I'm not really here to plug him, and since you're watching my video, I assume you're ready for something more in-depth. The original release of Stay Night was an eroge with adult scenes. They were contextualized in the story as rituals to provide one another with bodily fluids containing magical energy. Thus, the term mana transfer is synonymous with sex. The dialogue in these erotic scenes, at least via the English fan translation, is quite comedic. A rather infamous line of dialogue refers to Rin Tosaka having a defenseless anus when going doggy style with Shiro. Going back to Artoria, many people wonder how history could work with a female King Arthur, especially regarding Arthur's wife Guinevere and homunculus child Mordred. Earliest materials explain this by vaguely saying that Merlin enchanted Artoria to make her a pseudo-male, so that she could conceive a child. Fans have reasonably taken this to mean that Merlin turned Artoria into a temporary Futanari, and because of that, we endearingly call Merlin the Dick Wizard. Sakura Mato is a tragic character in Stay Night who gets violated by creatures called crestworms. Punching down on the poor girl, fans often make memes and jokes about her misfortune. It's just so easy. Hey, that covers all of Depth 1, so let's make like James Cameron and go even deeper to Depth 2. In Japan, most visual novels are published independently on PC, making them a rather niche market. When a VN gets popular enough, it gets ported to consoles. Fate Stay Night was no exception, getting an enhanced re-release called Fate Stay Night Rialta Nua on the PlayStation 2. This version added new features such as voice acting, a special epilogue for Saber's route called Last Episode, and some new CGs. Unfortunately, Japanese console games cannot show intercourse, so the game's adult scenes were removed, rewritten to be more family-friendly. While fans have patched the two versions together, restoring the adult content, these adult scenes still lack any voiceovers. Part of me still wants to start a GoFundMe to try and convince Ayako Kawasumi to voice Saber's H stuff. In 2006, Fate Stay Night got its first anime adaptation by Studio Dean. Fans are often divided on this adaptation because of its often sloppy visuals, and the fact that it tried to combine all three of the novel's routes into a single narrative. Luckily, it used Saber's route, the Fate route, as a base, making Dean's Stay Night the route's only anime portrayal. It's worth noting that even though this anime is mostly faithful to Artoria's route, it lacks that updated epilogue. Because of this, many fans desperately want UFO Table to make their own adaptation of the route. We'll come back to that later, though. The success of Fate Stay Night ushered in a sequel of sorts, a new visual novel called Fate Hollow Ataraxia. Instead of continuing any of the original three plot routes, this story bundles them all together to create a what-if scenario. In that regard, it's also known as a fan disc, where players can enjoy a more peaceful life with Stay Night's characters outside the violence of a Holy Grail war. Just like its predecessor, Hollow Ataraxia came out on PC with adult scenes, but those scenes were removed when it got a re-release on the PlayStation Vita. The Vita version adds voice acting, as well as some animated openings from UFO Table, meaning that, once again, we've been denied hentai voices. Rialta Nua also got a re-release on the Vita, being the novel's first outing in HD, with its own animations by UFO Table. Personally, I still feel that the patched PC versions are the definitive way to experience both visual novels. In 2007, Nasu and Takeuchi published their light novel series, Kara no Kyokai, The Garden of Sinners. These books became the basis of UFO Table's first Type Moon collaboration, adapting the series into a handful of films and OVAs. Despite being absolutely stunning, these films still haven't reached the audience they deserve. To this day, they don't have an official English dub, and are only available for streaming on Crunchyroll. Don't let this stop you though, as it's one of my absolute favorites. Fate's popularity launched a number of spin-offs. One is the light novel Fate Apocrypha, which takes place on a different timeline, featuring a much larger Holy Grail war. This work introduces series staples like Mordred and Astolfo. It too got an anime version, but because it wasn't created by UFO Table, it lacks the same production values. I love it, but other fans complain about the animation, as well as its protagonist Sieg. Fate Collide Liner Prisma Ilia is a manga spin-off that features Ilia as both a magical girl and the main character in her own story. This version of the story makes Ilia a 10-year-old child, and due to various raunchy situations she gets into with other girls her age, many fans avoid it. That said, Prisma Ilia has mostly been a success, leading to 3 seasons of anime and 2 movie adaptations. In addition to magical girls and loli, this entry actually takes itself very seriously, introducing some great lore and epic moments. In a bit of a shocking surprise, we got an RPG spin-off on the PSP called Fate Extra. It combines visual novel storytelling with turn-based dungeon crawling to craft a unique experience. Rather than occurring on Earth, Fate Extra takes place in a supercomputer on the Moon, making it a sci-fi spin-off. Outside of the different animes, this was the first Fate entry to get an official English localization, though this trend wouldn't last. The game is most iconic for introducing Nero and Tamamo no Mae. Of them, Nero caused some confusion, as she was clearly designed to be Fate Extra's equivalent of Artoria. As Fate's flagship girl, Type Moon felt that Extra may not succeed without her appeal. Takeuchi's artwork of Nero makes her nearly identical to Artoria, earning her the name Red Saber. This is even more confusing considering that Mordred, given the circumstances of her own Holy Grail War, was referred to as the Saber of Red. Artist Wada Arco has since differentiated Nero by drawing her in a much different style. Fate also received a fighting game on the PS2 and arcades called Fate Unlimited Codes. It was developed by Capcom. Amazingly, this game was ported to the PSP, where it received an English translation. Sadly, as a PSP title, it lacked a proper versus mode, making it inferior to its PS2 counterpart. I played the PSP version as part of my video on anime fighting games. You can find a link to it in the description. A more obscure spin-off is called Fate Strange Fake, an ongoing series of light novels written by Ryogo Narita and illustrated by Mori Shizuki. It's currently receiving a manga adaptation, with A1 Pictures set to release an anime version in the summer. Given the novels are still being published, however, it's likely the anime won't cover the entire story. With Fate in peak popularity with works like FGO, Strange Fake is generating hype, as the anime will be its official English debut. Light novels are especially hard to translate despite the high demand for them, whereas anime episodes can be translated in under a day. The version of Fate Stay Night released to the public is quite different from the earlier drafts that Type Moon had been working on. For instance, the decision to make King Arthur a girl didn't come till later in development. Likewise, the main character, Shiro, was supposed to be a girl with a drastically different backstory. Rather than discard all these old ideas, a short animated preview called Fate Prototype was released to show off what could have been. This OVA generated a lot of hype, but to this day there is no official work that actually tells Prototype's story in full. In 2012, Type Moon released a brand new visual novel, Mahotsukai no Yoru, or Witch on the Holy Night. It tells the story of Aoko Aozaki, a young girl who is suddenly chosen to inherit her family's magecraft instead of her sister Toko. Visually, this is one of the most proficient and impressive visual novels out there. Its cinematic feel and hefty use of CGs almost makes having an animated version pointless, though it is expected to get one from UFO Table. Given that none of Type Moon's visual novels were officially released in English prior, it's no surprise that this more obscure title would get the same neglect. While fans were able to translate Stay Night, Hollow Ataraxia, Tsukihime, and many other spin-offs, it's fascinating how an English version of Mahoyo took so long to emerge. Different fan projects started and died without ever delivering a final product. Only in 2022 did this novel finally reach overseas audiences, with an official re-release for the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. One of the longest-running gags in Type Moon history came when Nasu mentioned his desire to remake Tsukihime, a sentiment that would take over a decade to finally happen. Much of the tools used to make Mahoyo were repurposed to create Tsukihime, a piece of blue glass moon. This version changes various aspects of the story, and it also doesn't contain the full experience. As of writing this video, we're still awaiting the rest of that content. Despite the massive hype surrounding this remake, it's surprising that it doesn't have an official English release when Mahoyo does. Perhaps that will change in the near future. Going over to our other iceberg, we have the question, can Shiki kill servants? This is in reference to the characters Shiki Tono and Shiki Ryogi, who both have special eyes called the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. It lets them see the end to all things, and by cutting those lines of death, they can pretty much kill anything, even inanimate objects. One of the concerns when Ryogi was brought in as a guest character for Fate Grand Order was whether she'd be overpowered against enemy servants. According to lore, she should be able to slay anything with ease, but in order to balance the game, she was nerfed. Now the real question is whether it's a retcon or not. Nasu likes to write the most convoluted reasons why characters can break pre-established rules. Regarding the other Shiki, we have what is called the Tono gland. This is a meme reflecting on how Shiki Tono seems to attract women. Basically, he's got harem protagonist EX. Apparently, Shiki's bloodline, being that of demon hunters, repels ordinary people while attracting the supernatural, but that doesn't explain why he's so popular with women in particular. The original Fate Stay Night has 3 romantic options: Saber, Rin, or Sakura. During development, Nasu considered riding a separate route for Ilia. This was ultimately cut, and her arc was repurposed into the Heaven's Feel route. Unlike Shiki, Shiro's not a sister slammer. Fate Grand Order introduced a version of Shiro called Emiya Alter. It takes the concept of Archer and exaggerates him even more with darker skin. Not only did his design resemble old-fashioned blackface, in which white people would imitate black stereotypes, he was also described by his designer as Detroit Emiya, implying black people were intimidating criminals. While I don't think this was meant to be so mean-spirited, Aniplex of America was concerned people would interpret it as such, and so they edited Emiya Alter to have lighter skin while omitting the whole Detroit business. This, as far as I'm aware, is the only censorship facing the North American release of FGO, which is a pleasant surprise. None of the sexy stuff was ever altered, and that's how it should be. China, on the other hand, censored a number of characters. The last one for this tier points out the uncanny resemblance between Fate Apocrypha's Amakusa Shiro Tokisada and Yu-Gi-Oh's Yami Marek. This has inspired both memes and fan art. Now we're on to Depth 3, getting just a bit more obscure. In addition to their adaptation of Fate Stay Night, Studio Dean also made their own version of Unlimited Blade Works in the form of a single movie. While it features the quality animation we wish the series had, cramming an entire route into a single film resulted in a nearly incomprehensible experience. It required already knowing the story to follow along, limiting its audience. Now that UFO Table has made their version of Unlimited Blade Works, many have deemed this film entirely skippable. I still think it's kinda cool though. While Fate Hollow Ataraxia is more popular, Tsukihime also had a pseudo-sequel in the form of Kagetsu Toya. This visual novel did the same thing, creating a narrative excuse for the characters to interact in a more slice-of-life fashion. It's safe to say that without Kagetsu Toya, we probably wouldn't have had Hollow Ataraxia. In addition, Tsukihime also got another entry called the Plus Disc, which provides some bonus side stories. Its main narrative follows one of Akiha's classmates as she talks with a fake version of Shiki Tono, who also happens to be a murderer in disguise. Plus Disc also has 3 metafictional stories, in which the characters of Tsukihime break the fourth wall and talk about their own stories. Plus Disc was released twice, with the original selling at an event called Sunshine Creation 11. The first release only had the main story, Alliance of Illusionary Eyes, and one of the metafiction stories. The updated release came with the other 2 stories, wallpapers, chapters of Kana no Kyokai, and rare demo versions of Tsukihime. I mentioned in the previous tier that Tsukihime got a full-on remake recently. It only covered 2 routes, the ones for Arcuade and CL. These are known as the near-side routes. Upon completing the remake, however, players unlocked a special announcement for Tsukihime, The Other Side of Red Garden, a remake of the original's far-side routes. This is set to include routes for Akiha, Hisui, Kohaku, and the originally cut route for Satsuki Yumizuka. As of writing this, it hasn't been released, nor is there a proper release date. Contrary to what people might tell you, there in fact is a Tsukihime anime. It just sucks. It was a 12-episode series called Lunar Legend Tsukihime. It was made by JC staff, and was similar to Dean Stay Night in that it tried to combine aspects of all the routes into one. Overall, though, it mostly sticks to Arcoades. Compared to Fate Stay Night, which was filled with exciting action scenes and CGs to better illustrate the story, Tsukihime's CGs are very sparse, relying mostly on text. As a result, its anime had to interpret a lot of the visuals, settling on a style that many fans despise. Those fans jokingly pretend that there is no Tsukihime anime. Oddly enough, a more faithful representation of Tsukihime's characters can be seen in the parody anime Carnival Phantasm. It is a beloved series in the fandom that contains comedic skits for both Fate and Tsukihime. It's loaded with inside jokes that really pay off after you become familiar with the original works. In a way, it's like an animated version of Hollow Ataraxia and Kagetsu Toya. In a similar manner, there's a spin-off manga called Today's Menu for the Emiya family. Stay Night featured lengthy scenes of Shiro and the others cooking food, and to continue that trend, Emiya Family is a series all about cooking. The story takes place under similar conditions to Hollow Ataraxia, a peaceful slice of life with a new recipe per episode. Part of this manga was adapted into an anime by UFO Table, and somehow it still doesn't have a proper North American Blu-ray. What the hell, Aniplex? Speaking of works that don't get proper releases, we have Fate Extra CCC, a pseudo-sequel to the original Fate Extra. This game came out at the tail end of the PSP's life cycle, featuring a darker story with a lot more fan service. It's the first entry in the series to introduce BB and the Sakura 5, as well as other favorites like Elizabeth Bathory. It was also the first time that Gilgamesh, the series' antagonist, was portrayed in a positive light, as the player could summon him as their own servant. Sadly, regarding localization, this game has hit a trifecta of issues. The first game didn't sell that well overseas, and considering CCC was more risque, Axis, the guys who localized the first title, decided not to release a sequel so late into the PSP's lifespan. Fans have been attempting to translate it for a long time, but so far the best we can do is see the Gilgamesh route translated on YouTube. Last I heard, fans are working on patching the emulated PSP version. I've done a comprehensive lore on that game, so be sure to check out that Type Moon lore playlist. Much more successful was Fate Extella, a Musou spin-off of Extra released on PS4 by Marvelous Entertainment. It told a much deeper story than most games in the genre, and because Marvelous had purchased the US company Xseed at the right moment, Extella got the localization it deserved. It's a fun game that introduces Altera, aka Attila the Hun. The game got a sequel called Fate Extella Link, which improved gameplay and added characters, but had a much weaker storyline. It too was released in English. Hooray! You can watch an entire playthrough of the first game on my channel. Similar to Carnival Phantasm, but much less popular, is a parody manga called Koha Ace, made by Keikenchi. I'm sure you recognize this goofy art style. Technically, it was being published prior to Carnival Phantasm, introducing the characters Okita Soji and Oda Nobunaga. Among its incarnations, it was merged into Fate Grand Order, allowing those servants to be presented outside of their chibi style. A more cohesive narrative was Fate Koha Ace, which told of a Holy Grail war featuring Japanese servants. Mangaka Ryoji Hirano found the story compelling enough to adapt it into a more serious manga called Fate Type Redline. As of this video, the manga is still currently ongoing. Fate Grand Order is easily Type Moon's cash cow. It's still successful in its mobile form, but in an attempt to make a more intense gameplay experience, a spin-off called Fate Grand Order Arcade was released. This game carries the predatory gacha system to Japanese arcades, this time rewarding players with physical cards for their summoned servants. Due to this, it's extremely unlikely that overseas arcades will invest in such a complicated machine. The physical cards also make it far less likely that the game will ever be ported to PC or consoles. As a result, all those amazing graphics can only be enjoyed by players in Japan who have enough time and money to stay glued to the arcades. Fate Zero introduced a character named Waver Velvet. A series of light novels called The Case Files of Lord Elmaloy II follow his journey after the Fourth Grail War. It introduces the character Grey, a young girl raised to be Artoria's resurrected body. Part of this light novel series was adapted into an anime by Studio Troika. While it's a fantastic look into the magecraft of the Nasuverse, it was marketed as a detective story, which is misleading given how unpredictable magecraft can be. The anime makes some slight changes to the novels, while also introducing some anime-only plot arcs. A sequel to the novels, titled The Adventures of Lord Elmaloy II, is still being published. It follows Waver after the Fifth Grail War, showing us an older version of Rin Tosaka, while officially incorporating Kara no Kyokai into the timeline of Fate Stay Night. There are loosely scattered fan translations of these light novels, and you can watch my comprehensive lore videos on each volume. I'm still working on this series, so you have time to catch up. One of Nasu's earlier written works was an entry for a doujin anthology called Angel Voice, back in 1999. He contributed a short story called Notes, which tells of humanity's extinction in a science fiction future. This story introduced the types, or ultimate ones, that Type Moon gets its namesake from. While this story isn't directly tied to any of his other works, Nasu has reused many ideas from Notes while creating his fictional multiverse. This story is also referred to occasionally as Angel Notes. With that, we're going even deeper to Depth 4. Due to the success of Carnival Phantasm, Type Moon decided to apply the same formula to Fate Grand Order, resulting in an anime series called Fate Grand Carnival. It's quite fun, but as of right now there are only 3 episodes, which is a far cry from how many the first series got. Given how much Fate Stay Night changed during its initial development, it's not surprising that several planned plot routes were ultimately cut before release. Tsukihime had the Yumizuka route cut, while Stay Night had Ilia's cut. Apparently, we were also supposed to get routes for Shinji and Medea. Not sure how I feel about a Shinji route, though. Rather than getting a proper anime adaptation, Fate Extra received a metatextual sequel called Fate Extra Last Encore. I consider this to be the most controversial Fate anime, as Nasu apparently wrote it as a visual novel, which didn't translate well to animation. Studio Shaft, often known for its bold visuals, was an equally bold choice. Compared to their other works, Last Encore felt sloppy. It's still a valuable experience, but it requires already having thorough knowledge of the original game. Speaking of Fate Extra, given that Fate's international popularity wasn't in full swing till after Fate Zero and FGO, that means a lot of people weren't able to experience Extra on the PSP proper. Instead, it's common for fans to play the game using emulation. With the death of the PSP's eShop, as well as the rising cost of rare physical copies, this makes sense. Unlimited Codes, the other Fate title on PSP, was only ever available as a digital download, making emulation the only way to play it now. The Rin Tosaka we experience in Fate Extra seems to be somewhat different from the one we know in Stay Night. Obviously, Extra is a separate timeline, but some fans have speculated that Extra Rin may be the daughter of a Rin we're more familiar with. When we see Rin's actual body outside the moon cell, she has a different hair color that matches her incarnation as Ereshkigal in Fate Grand Order. Is there any special meaning behind this? Who knows? Perhaps details can be fleshed out in its upcoming remake, Fate Extra Record. It's currently in development by Studio BB, a subsidiary of Type Moon created to develop 3D games for the current gen. We've seen some impressive trailers of the game, but since news is scarce, fans worry it's stuck in development hell. Recall that I mentioned Fate Prototype is only a conceptual work. Well, that apparently hasn't stopped authors from making a prequel to it. Fate Prototype, Fragments of Sky Silver, is a light novel created to explain a Holy Grail war that takes place prior to Prototypes. This work is known for introducing characters such as Ozymandias and Paracelsus von Hohenheim. The same author has made a side story called Fate Labyrinth. Unlike Fragments of Sky Silver, which is a series, Labyrinth is only a single volume. Despite being a spin-off of Prototype, this novel features characters from Fate Stay Night proper. As if that weren't enough, Fate has yet another light novel spin-off called Fate Requiem. It takes place in an alternate future where, after a devastating war, people live exclusively within Tokyo, Japan. Everyone's able to summon a servant of their own, except for the protagonist, Eris Utsumi. While this story is referenced within a collaboration event for FGO, it's still in production. This creates a strange dilemma for international fans, as none of these light novels have been officially localized. Overseas fans are actually being introduced to the characters first in FGO, though it should be the other way around. 428 Shibuya Scramble is a visual novel adventure game first made for the Nintendo Wii. It's a mystery story developed by Chunsoft, but it features a special scenario made by Nasu and Takeuchi. This story, called the Kanon scenario, follows a young girl with synesthesia who gets trained by a mercenary from childhood. She has a rivalry with a woman named Alphard who is trained by the same man. This Kanon scenario received its own sequel in anime form, simply titled Kanon. While it has very little to do with anything in the Nasuverse, Nasu's plot ideas and Takeuchi's character designs are apparent. Some might say that Kanon is a gun-toting saber-face. Oh, and I've covered this anime's lore as well. To commemorate the Japanese Blu-ray release of the Unlimited Bladeworks anime series, Type Moon created a short novel called Garden of Avalon, which contains excerpts of Artoria's past life as King Arthur. It provides much-needed character development for the various Knights of the Round Table. Later on, this novel was adapted into an audio drama, where it was more easily translated for overseas fans. It's now been fully translated, and I have a 3-part lore series for it because I love Artoria. Similarly, Type Moon also released a drama series called All Around Type Moon. Like Carnival Phantasm, it features skits from various works such as Fate, Tsukihime, and Kata no Kyokai. It's narrated by Joji Nakata, the Japanese voice for Kire Kotomine and Nero Chaos. Around the same time, author Eri Takanashi wrote and illustrated a manga series called Take Moon, which, as the name implies, gives us a different take on key moments in the Nasuverse. In fact, some of the skits in Take Moon were adapted into Carnival Phantasm. In 2008, Eri was set to design characters for a new anime project between Type Moon and UFO Table called Girls Work. It was meant to be a story in which Japan's district of Shinjuku merged with Paris. The last official news of the anime came in 2013, when UFO Table assured fans it was still in production. I think it's safe to say that this is lost in development hell. While fans disown the Tsukihime anime, many consider the Tsukihime manga to be a wonderful alternative. It too blends various plot routes into one, but it does so with more vibrancy and maturity than the anime. It also features a unique ending in which Shiki Tono reunites with Arcuade at her castle. It's happier than Arcuade's true ending, and also appears to set the story up for its planned sequel, which we'll get to further on. Fate incorporates a lot of side characters who don't contribute much to the main story. Among them are Shiro's classmates Kane Himuro, Makidera Kaede, and Saegusa Yukika. To flesh these characters out further, they have their own spin-off 4-koma manga called Fate School Life: Himuro's Universe. It takes place alongside the events of Stay Night, maintaining a comedic atmosphere. Also focusing on parody, Fate has a spin-off fighting game called Fate Tiger Coliseum. Like Unlimited Codes, it was developed by Capcom, but features chibi-style graphics and a much sillier plotline. While Unlimited Codes was localized, this one wasn't, which is a shame, since it would be fun to play as Saber in a lion costume. Go! Type Moon fans are generally aware of Notes, but Nasu also wrote a different story called Tsuki no Sango, or Lunar Choral. It was made to be read by voice actress Maya Sakamoto during her Full Moon Recital Hall event. The story takes place in the year 3000, at the peak of humanity's prosperity. It follows a princess of the Moon People who lives on Earth in a 50-person colony. To accompany Sakamoto's performance, a short film by UFO Table played in the background. The story has since been adapted into a 42-page illustrated book, as well as a manga series. Honestly, Fate Grand Order could have an iceberg all to itself, given the sheer amount of derivative works it has. I'm glad this iceberg bundled them all together, as it's not what I want to focus on. A few standout pieces worth noting are the various anime and manga adaptations, the ridiculous stage plays, as well as the rhythm game Waltz in the Moonlight Lost Room. I played that one on the channel, but then all the music got copyrighted. Oh, and I almost forgot about Shiro Day. Can't do that. Shiro Day is an unofficial holiday that occurs on October 20th on Twitter. It started in 2019 as a result of user Jazz the Lass convincing others to switch their profile pics to Shiro. Fellow Fate tuber Extreme S Manpig then shared the thread in a video called Shiro.avi. Now, tons of people online use that day to swap avatars, roleplay as Shiro, and spam memes enough to ensure that hashtag Shiro Day stays trending. Moving on to our other iceberg, we've got a reference to how Heaven's Feel can be interpreted as an abortion analogy. This has to do with Angra Mainyu, a being embodying all the world's evils, getting born as a result of the Fifth Grail War. Kirei Kotomine desperately wants to see this being come to life, even if it might cause mass destruction. Shiro and Ilya, however, work to destroy it. I'm sure through some Freudian logic, people can see Angra's growing body resembling a fetus. Mo Ikai, which translates to one more time, refers to a meme video featuring Saber, Rin, and Sakura dancing. The original video has been taken down, due to copyright issues no doubt, but a version featuring an English cover by Akane Sasusora is still online in horrible quality. Given how popular Fate is, it's a bit insane just how few fans have actually taken the time to read the visual novel. Even worse, some of these fans take to social media acting like an authority despite not having the full experience. Fans also joke about how many Shikis the Nasuverse has. There's Shiki Tono, Shiki Nanaya, Shiki Ryogi, and Void Shiki. Let's not forget that Shiki Ryogi has multiple personalities. It's always a chore trying to keep track of them all in a conversation. There was also that fake Shiki I mentioned earlier, and yet another Shiki that we'll cover a bit later. Fate Grand Order's most famous whale is a guy who spent around 600,000 yen trying to get NP5 on his Skahak. Some fans have spread an urban legend that the guy borrowed his money from the Yakuza, meaning he's gotten into some serious shit thanks to a gacha game. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if this is a joke about the famous whale, or another supposed player who also wanted to go for Skahak. It's a joke, so I don't think it matters much. With that, it's finally time to dive even deeper into Depth 5. Honestly, I'm not sure why this is so low, but Fate Extra CCC has a spin-off manga called Foxtail. It focuses on Tamamo no Mae, while introducing us to Suzuka Gozen. It also develops the other members of the Sakura 5 better than CCC itself. I quite like it, though it's a pain in the ass trying to keep up with all these unfinished manga and light novels. Melty Blood also has its own manga adaptation called Melty Blood X. I suppose it's obscure because, rather than adapting the game itself, it instead adapts a drama CD called Back Alley Pyramid Night. Another Melty Blood spin-off is a manga called Melty Blood Back Alley Nightmare. It stars the Back Alley Alliance, a partnership between Sion, Satsuki, and Riesbeif, as they do a crossover of sorts with characters from Fate Extra and Grand Order. The manga was released in 2 volumes. The Nasuverse is absolutely packed with lore. It's so dense that not even its official works convey it all. In addition to randomly spouting bits of trivia through interviews, Nasu also publishes extended lore in the form of material books. These exist mainly for the Fate works, but Type Moon's own magazine, Type Moon Ace, also divvies out general Nasuverse lore, along with updates on their projects. The Einsburn Consultation Room was a series of animated shorts that accompanied Fate Zero's Blu-ray release. It mimics the Taiga Dojo sections of Stay Night, along with the CL Sensei sections of Tsukihime. Each episode explains different aspects of Fate Zero's story, offering some new visuals and context. Nasu loves lecturing his viewers, so this is no surprise. I don't think these were ever released in the English Blu-rays, though. I can't say for sure. On the same topic, Nasu has gone on to say that Fate Zero is not a real prequel to Fate Stay Night. Apparently, there are some details in Zero that don't quite line up with facts of the past written in Stay Night. Nasu has his own ideas for what the Fourth Grail War looked like, and while Zero more or less gets it right, it technically counts as a separate timeline. I think this is stupid, given that Nasu hasn't even released his own version of events. One interesting factoid is that some of Fate Zero's designs aren't compatible with FGO. It shows Finn McCool as a brown-haired, bearded guy, but when FGO gave its version of the character, they made him into a blonde pretty boy. In addition, an early design for Humbaba was released in Fate Zero's visual guide, and it's not compatible with the design used in Fate Strange Fake. This same illustration shows Enkidu as a more historically accurate Beastman, rather than the androgynous design from FGO. Ryukishi Zero Nana, the author behind the Higurashi and Umineko series, once mentioned that he and his brother took inspiration from Tsukihime, helping them decide to make their own sound novels. Considering the dude started pumping Higurashi out just 2 years later is hella impressive. Type Moon had plans to create a Tsukihime too, but those plans resulted in a series of short stories instead. One of them, Talk, follows the cast as they confront Einash, a vampiric forest, and one of the dead apostle ancestors. Prelude refers to 3 different stories that each feature different dead apostles. While it uses a lot of the same characters, Fate Grand Order's timeline is different from Fate Stay Night's. One of the biggest differences is the fact that in FGO, the Grail is never corrupted by Angra Mainyu. The other turning point is told of in a short story called Clock Tower 2015, in which the mage Lev Liner realizes he's being used as a pawn in Gaetia's plan to incinerate humanity. To avoid going down the FGO timeline, the dude kills himself, foiling the entire ritual. When the first season of Demon Slayer was airing, UFO Table was hit by allegations of evading taxes. This turned out to be true, resulting in a hefty fine. Hikaru Kondo, the studio's founder, ignored tax law so that his company could continue animating in a worst-case scenario. It's hard to say if this affected the production of any Type Moon works, but this was around the time they were releasing the Heaven's Feel movies. Ever the prolific author, Nasu wrote a mystery novel called DDD, or Decoration Disorder Disconnection. Outside of a cameo by Mitsuru Kamekura, this story has no direct ties to the rest of the Nasuverse, but it does seem hella interesting. It's about an outbreak of demonic possessions, causing victims to grow body parts and gain powers. I already mentioned Type Moon Ace as well as Studio BB, so let's instead talk about Fire Girl. It's a light novel series published by Type Moon. Fire Girl was written by Meteora Hoshizora, the author of Fate Requiem, and was illustrated by Bun Bun, whose art is most famously seen in the Sword Art Online novels. Again, this one's not really part of the Nasuverse. Takeuchi once made a one-shot manga called Cloak, Cane and Veil for the same publication Nasu wrote notes for. It tells the story of Gabriel, an artificial humanoid postman who works in a post-apocalyptic world. She struggles with the fact that in 5 days, she will run out of power, which is essentially her form of death. Type Moon loves April Fool's Day, using it as a chance to announce fake parody projects, such as Neko Arc the movie. Some of their pranks were actual works, such as the visual novel Back Alley Satsuki, Chapter Heroine Sanctuary. The most serious of these works is The Room of the April Witch, a short story about a witch who only opens her house once a year on April 1st. Originally, Fate Apocrypha was pitched to fans as an online game, an MMO perhaps, releasing the character files for who would be participating in the war. Soon after, though, it was changed to be a light novel instead. Honestly, I don't know if Type Moon is ready for an MMO, if they can't even finish Extra Record. I do like the idea of an MMO where you customize your master and summon one of FGO's many servants. Sounds like Requiem already uses a similar premise. Takeuchi might be the famed illustrator of Type Moon, but it would be unfair to say he does all the artwork on his own. That was the case for the original Tsukihime, but that production left him severely overworked, having to color 100 pages of CGs in just 3 days. Even after busting his ass alongside his day job, the results still weren't up to par. For Kagetsu Toya, Type Moon hired 2 colorists, Atsuki Takao and Koyama Hirokazu, to lighten the load. The art between the 2 VNs has a dramatic increase in quality. Ever since, Takeuchi has only handled the line work, entrusting coloring to his co-workers. His specialty is manga, after all. Fate Grand Order features a large number of guest artists for its various servants. Generally, these servants are even designed by their respective artists. Most of these artists also happen to make hentai or erotic doujin works. Redrop and Raita are good examples, though there's a catch. Presumably due to a contract, none of these artists are allowed to make doujins of their own characters. I guess it would seem too official that way? Rie Tanaka, the voice actress of Kirie Fujo and Kiara Sesshoin, once recorded covers of Anarchy in the UK, and Ruby Soho is part of an album titled Voice Actresses Legendary Punk Songs Collection. I'll admit this particular tier list is a bit old now. It claims that Summer Maeve didn't get a lot of artwork made of her, but a cursory glance at Gelboru proves that wrong. Good job, artists! Moving forward, let's proceed to Depth 6. Before the release of Melty Blood Type Lumina, a user on Reddit claimed to have a game journalist friend who got an advanced preview of the game. Some of their leaked information was legit, while some was bogus, such as Roa not being in the game. I don't see too much special about this. A year before its official release, Fate Stay Night's visual novel had a trial version with some interesting changes. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it does show the kinds of things that get altered in development. Here's a video comparing the differences. In 2019, Delightworks and Type Moon collaborated on an official Fate Stay Night board game called Dominate Grail War, featuring new illustrations. I love a good board game, so this would be really fun if it weren't exclusively Japanese. Contrary to its name, Fate Unpublished Material is a book published by Type Moon in 2019 that details various ideas they had in mind for the 2006 Fate Stay Night anime by Studio Dean. Most notably, it proposes a new character named Tachie, a shielder who is clearly the prototype for Mashu Kyrielide. One of the characters in Melty Blood, Miyako Arima, received her own spin-off manga called Hana no Miyako. It's a strange alternate timeline where Miyako's school settles all manners through combat. Miyako herself appears older, and the story even has a female variant of Shiki Nanaya. Its cast is a strange blend of Tsukihime, Stay Night, and original characters. As the Nasuverse continues to be expanded through various works, it's no surprise that some of Nasu's original statements have been retconned to make way for new ideas. My favorite of these is when Artoria used to say that she was only meant to be a saber servant, whereas FGO lets you use a version of her for every class in the game. It's hard to believe that Stay Night hardly even mentions Rongo Minyad, despite it being an important aspect of her character moving forward. Of course she'd be a Lancer, what with one of the world's most important lances available to her. One of Nasu's earliest works is an unreleased manuscript for Mahotsukai no Yoru. Hardly anyone's read it, and there's only one known copy of it. That said, we do have some nifty pictures that show the cast with Takeuchi's older style. Beast's Lair is an online forum dedicated to Type Moon content. It's a fantastic resource for series information, as well as updates on fan translations and the like. I'm not so sure why this is so low on the list, but Today's Menu for the Emiya Family has a video game tie-in on the Nintendo Switch called Everyday Today's Menu for the Emiya Family. It lets you choose between Saber, Rin, Sakura, and even Cuchulainn to participate in various cooking minigames. It's a delightful experience with a full English digital release. My wife and I did a bonus video where we baked Saber's chocolate cookies. I'll link it in the description. Starting late 2019, Type Moon opened up a museum at the Sony Music Roppongi building. This 15-year anniversary exhibit was loaded with merch, books, and cool showcases like a model of Fuyuki City. The museum was available in 3 phases, each themed around one of Stay Night's plot routes. Thanks to the pandemic, actually attending this museum was difficult, and it shut down at the end of August 2020. There's more regarding this museum a little bit further in, though. I already covered the Room of the April Witch, so let's go on to Fate Zero, Another Story, Heart of Freaks. This is a short story detailing one of Kiritsugu's missions, in which he and his mentor Natalia hunt down a mage named Heinrich Zepter. The Bamboo Broom is an old website used by Nasu and Takeuchi to showcase Type Moon information such as new releases and staff profiles. It also hosted a blog called the Bamboo Broom Diary, which ran from 2002 to 2022. The page is still around, but it only shows the latest release of Kara no Kyokai. Archives of the site go back as far as 1999. For its 10th anniversary, Type Moon held a 2-day event called Type Moon Fez. It took place at the Pacifico Yokohama Convention Center in 2012, hosting project announcements, voice actor appearances, and musical performances by Kalafina and other Type Moon musicians. I would have loved to attend, but I was wrapping up college around then. Before Tsukihime's official release, a number of demo versions were released at different conventions. These different builds of the story came with different art assets that were ultimately scrapped. The most interesting is Tsukihime Trial Edition, which uses different CGs and character designs. Another of these demos was Tsukihime Half Moon Edition, which only showcased the near side routes. It's a rare version of the game with only 300 copies ever being made. While the demo itself was mostly what the final game looked like, it came with bonuses, such as a visual novel version of Takeuchi's manga, Cloak, Cane and Veil, and digital scans of his other manga, Valkyria Nieve Saga. Between 2009 and 2014, Type Moon had a mobile website called Mahotsukai no Hako. It starred 2 mascots named Hibiki Hibino and Chikagi Katsuragi. While the website is now defunct, this obscure story was continued in the form of a manga called Hibichika Time, as well as a series of drama CDs. The cast makes a cameo in an episode of Carnival Phantasm, where they work at the iconic cafe Ananerba. Originally, Fate Stay Night was set to release in 2 halves, much like Tsukihime's near and far side routes. The Ilya and Sakura routes were to be called Fate Other Night. I'm honestly kinda glad that never came to be. Fate Zero Next Encounter was a social game for mobile phones released in 2012 based on the idea of swapping the masters and servants from Fate Zero. I don't really understand how someone's supposed to play this game, but it did introduce a boatload of awesome Fate Zero art. Type Moon-affiliated writer Mateo Hoshizora worked on an anime series called World Conquest Zvezda Plot, and as part of its advertising campaign, Type Moon's official website pretended to be conquered by its main cast. Beyond that, it's not really part of the Nasuverse at all. Back when Netflix still hosted Fate Zero, fans argued about whether that version was the TV version or the uncensored, uncut Blu-ray version. I can't recall what the answer was, and it's a moot point now. I don't really care much for versus battle debates, but apparently fans question the way the fight between Semiramis and Mordred played out in Apocrypha. I guess some people have made fanfiction versions of the fight where it happens differently. The Rialta Nua release of Fate Stay Night features an Easter egg joking about an originally planned Shinji route. It was based on the idea that Shiro chooses to team up with Shinji rather than Rin. By clicking a secret button in the extra menu, you unlock this route, which abruptly ends when Ilya pops in to cancel it. As a reward, you get a special title screen saying Wakame Paradise, in reference to Shinji's hair looking like seaweed. Wakame Paradise is also the name of Shinji's fan club on Beast's Lair, as well as a group that translated Capsule Servant's story mode. On that note, I should probably mention that Capsule Servant is another Fate spin-off game. It's a cutesy tower defense released back in 2014. It was later bundled with the Vita release of Hollow Ataraxia, and it also has a mobile port. It's all in Japanese, of course, but you can visit the Wakame Paradise WordPress site to read their translation. I'll link it in the description. Just what would we do without fan translators? I suppose that's why the iceberg mentions people learning Japanese in order to play Fate Extra CCC. It's especially hard to do that, as it involves translating kanji. For the few characters who smoke in Type Moon, most of them all happen to smoke the exact same kind. It's a Taiwanese brand called Dragon Smoke that you can see with Toko, Kairi Shishigo, and Natalia. In a roundabout way, both voice actresses Carrie Walgren and Maya Sakamoto have played a version of Jeanne d'Arc. While Carrie is known for the more recent role of Artoria in Fate, she plays the role of Jeanne in the PSP video game simply titled Jeanne d'Arc. Maya Sakamoto is the Japanese voice for Jeanne in the Nasuverse, as well as the game Jeanne d'Arc. Earlier, I mentioned that Ryukishi was a fan of Tsukihime. As such, it's no wonder that he based the design of Chie-sensei and Higurashi off of Ciel. Don't forget, Ciel was also a teacher at the end of each route. We are officially below the iceberg now, sinking to a depth of 7. While Type Moon displayed their original ideas for Stay Night in the form of Fate Prototype, that wasn't the only early version Nasu had in mind. In even earlier drafts, he and Takeuchi were working on names like Fate Skipper, Old Fate, and Fate Origin. Drafts of these works were said to be on display at the now-closed Type Moon Museum. I've already covered a ton of different drama CDs. Pretty much every mainline work in the Nasuverse has them. In essence, they're audio skits that come bundled with new visuals. The most iconic, in my opinion, are Garden of Avalon, The Outsider's Performance, and Strange Tales of Heroic Spirit Lore, King of the Cavern Edmond Dantes. I already covered Garden of Avalon, but Outsider's Performance is one of the few works to feature a young Taiga during the Fourth Grail War. King of the Cavern details how Dantes defeated Roa on the FGO timeline. All three deserve anime adaptations, honestly. In addition to drama CDs, a handful of Fate Stay Night characters have image songs performed by their respective seiyuu. I actually didn't know much about these, but it's cool hearing Artoria's image song, Distant Dream, composed by Kenji Kawai, the guy who did the music for Dean Stay Night. Rin, Sakura, Ilia, Medea, Medusa, Shiro, and Archer also have their own image songs. I'll put a link to Saber's below. If you've seen Apocrypha, you'll know that Astolfo is one of the war's only survivors. He actually has a short novella called Side of Survivor that serves as an epilogue to the series. Because Astolfo has a terrible memory, he wants to create a proper record of the Great Grail War, and so he interviews other survivors. It was bundled with the anime's Blu-ray in Japan, and it pisses me off we don't get cute bonuses like this overseas. Normally, when you think of doujinshi, you picture all those lewd hentai mangas, but did you know some doujins are officially licensed by Type Moon? One example is Fate Mahjong Night, a parody manga where the servants face off in mahjong rather than killing each other. These are official in the sense that some of their designs were later used in mainline productions. For instance, we have the doujin called Gugulana, the Bull of Heaven, that, as you'd expect, gives us our first look at Ishtar's Bull of Heaven. Sword Dancers is an Ilia doujin that has her becoming a counter-guardian like Archer. Speaking of Ilia, the Prisma Ilia series had a 3DS title released in 2014, Japan only, of course. Back in the day, Takeuchi and Nasu were part of a doujin circle called Koshi Kake Club. This was the circle they went by when first making stuff like Angel Notes. When we meet Jack the Ripper in Apocrypha, she had already been summoned for the war. That's because it was missing a special chapter called Act 1 Unbirth, which was later released in Type Moon Ace. It details how Jack was summoned by a douchebag who thought he needed to murder someone as a catalyst. Therefore, he tried to kill a prostitute named Reika, and it was her desire to live that actually summoned Jack. Even though Reika's not a proper mage, Jack considers her to be her rightful master. Additional details were added to this chapter in the form of yet another story called Zugzwang. When it came time to design Arcuade, Nasu and Takeuchi based her off an unnamed French model they had seen. I can definitely see the resemblance. Tsukihime never had an FMV opening like Stay Night did. After the fact, however, Type Moon made one for fun and hid it on the disk files for Kagetsutoya. Sneaky bastards. It's cool we have it archived. There exists a book called Type Moon no Kiseki by Shusei Sakagami that details the biographies of Nasu and Takeuchi. It's supposedly rare, but I see it on sale on eBay for $52. A much more rare piece of Type Moon media is a novel Nasu wrote called Kori no Hana. While he mentioned it as one of his only presentable works, he's never released it to the public. All we know is that it's about a knight. Along with Type Moon's 15th anniversary, Takeuchi released an art book called Return to Avalon. It's loaded with new art, as well as a compilation of materials previously used exclusively for promos, DVD sets, etc. It's no surprise that there would be some famous people who happen to love Type Moon. Dan Salvato, the creator of Doki Doki Literature Club, Eliezer Yudkowsky, an AI researcher, and Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear fame are all fans of Type Moon's works. Type Moon Academy Chibichuki is a parody manga made by Hanabana Tsubomi. It features various Type Moon characters being transported to Katatsuki Academy by Nasu himself. It has a lot of adorable chibi designs. French Bread, the company that made Melty Blood, also created a fighting game called Under Night in Birth. In honor of Melty Blood, they incorporated Sion as a playable character under the name Eltnum. This has fans wondering if the Nasuverse and Under Night are in any way officially connected, or if it's just a cameo. I already mentioned Alliance of Illusionary Eyes regarding the Tsukihime Plus disc, but apparently the game was released as a separate download in order to test the Kiri Kiri 2 script engine Type Moon would use in later projects. Despite being available in unofficial English for many years now, plenty of fans still haven't actually read the original Fate Stay Night. A lot of them cite how difficult it is to download and set up, which honestly isn't that hard. Nonetheless, there are die-hard fans who have converted the entire novel into a web browser version. Even if you've already read it, this web version lets you easily skip to certain scenes for reference or sharing. I'll put a link to it below. Beyond their limited-run museum, Type Moon also opens up small cafes across Japan. One of the perks of going to one of these is a chance to see a special anime called Fate Zero Cafe. It's a cute story in which chibi versions of Zero's cast work at a cafe run by Saber. It was originally a manga, but the animated version can only be seen by going to the cafes in person. Fate Hollow Ataraxia contained 2 separate minigames beyond its main narrative. One was Ilia's Castle, and the other is a card game called Toraburu Hanafuda Travel Journal. The game was later expanded on and ported to PSP, PS2, and PS Vita. The Kara no Kyokai light novels to this day lack a proper English translation. The company Del Rey started the project officially, but then went bankrupt before releasing the first chapter. Bakatsuki on Beast Slayer translated it up to Chapter 5 before Del Rey announced their version, effectively scaring them off. The most complete translation is riddled with inaccuracies, so a Reddit user named FixUp vowed to set things right, starting his own translation. Sadly, this too never came to fruition, with FixUp deleting all of his social media to instead roleplay as Nasu and Takeuchi. It's really weird. Musician and singer The Weeknd is apparently a man of culture. For his song Coming Down, he sampled a section from the 2006 Dean Stay Night anime where Shiro and Saber kiss. I think it's cool that fans figured this out. I can't play the audio here since YouTube sucks, but I will post a link below. Type Moon characters have cameoed in a variety of other franchises. There's a Zero collaboration with Arad Senki, extra characters are in Chevalier Saga Tactics, Stay Night characters are in Divine Gate, and Mahoyo characters are in Lord of Vermilion. Plenty of Fate skins can be found in games like Monster Hunter and Phantasy Star Online 2, only in Japan that is. Artoria is also a character in the crossover fighting game Nitro Plus Blasters. You can also see me play that game in my anime fighting games video. Nero Rider refers to a fan comic in which Nero wants to be more like Kintoki's rider form. She wears a skimpy biker outfit and tries to ride on top of Vlad's shoulders. Back before we had a full English translation of Mahotsukai no Yoru, the only completed fan translation was done in French, leading some fans to consider brushing up on their French skills to consume their Japanese media. While Shiki Tono and Shiki Ryogi both have mystic eyes of death perception, the way their respective eyes work is a bit different. Mainly, Tono sees death lines that often converge on specific points. Some have argued that this makes Tono's eyes more capable, but it's not like they've had a chance to fight or anything. In the original Tsukihime, there's a group called the 27 Dead Apostle Ancestors. Michael Roa Valdemyong is technically the 28th, but the other Dead Apostles don't want to include him since he's a heretic. That's right, a heretic among vampires. From what I can tell, the remaining entries in my second tier list are all repeats, which means we can sink further into Depth 8. There ain't no coming back from here. This is the official poster for the Kana no Kyokai film Paradox Spiral. It shows the character Leo Shirazumi in a rather effeminate light. Not only is it odd for Leo to be on this poster, since he's not in the movie proper, but it also seems out of character for him, at least according to the maker of this iceberg. Kana no Kyokai's 7th film, Murder Speculation Part 2, lists its director as Shinsuke Takizawa, who's apparently not even a real person, but rather a pseudonym for several staff members at UFO Table. I assume this means they co-directed the film? Interesting. It's my favorite of the films, and maybe that's part of why. One of the Kana no Kyokai drama CDs came with a trailer made in Flash. This reminds me of when Newgrounds and Albino Black Sheep were popular. The trial edition of Fate Stay Night links to a page containing additional trailers for the game. 2 of them feature 3D assets and transitions not used in the game itself. Their quality is ass, but it's funny because the second trailer uses Microsoft Sam text-to-speech for the English text at the beginning. Project Mouthwash is a group making the Unlimited Blade Works abridged series, and many of its jokes are memed by the Western fandom. Aniplex will occasionally drop a reference to the abridged series. In UBW Abridged, Shiro is envious of Archer's swords, and in FGO, Archer is envious of Emiya Alter's guns. Kagetsu Toya has a main narrative, as well as various side stories. One of these stories, Dawn, happens to be written by Maruyama Kugane, the author of Overlord. In interviews, Nasu has revealed some extremely old ideas he had for Tsukihime. Back then, Shiki and Arcuade were both supposed to be vampires, and their personalities were opposite what they were in the final game. Satsuki was also supposed to be one of Shiki's gay classmates. This dates back to around 1994. Before completing Melty Blood, French Bread made a different fighting game called Glove on Fight in order to test out their coding routines. As a doujin fighter, it combined characters like Ciel, Kanon's Ayu Tsukimiya, and even Dejiko from DigiCarrot. Fans have been thirsting over the idea of a Tsukihime collab in FGO for a while now. This has resulted in a fan-made trailer meant to trick people on April Fools. It's not exactly convincing, but it is impressive for a fan work. Equally insane is how fans have ported Fate Stay Night and Hollow Ataraxia to the Nintendo DS. I really don't get why anyone would want to do this, but again, it's an impressive achievement. If the DS can handle Stay Night, then it seems that the Game Boy Advance can handle Tsukihime, sort of. Dojin Circle Hataya Inside developed a program called Rinkai Tsukihime that was able to convert the visual novel into a ROM that would play on GBA emulators. Now we just need to get it running on a graphing calculator. So this is a photo of Takeuchi. His real name is actually Tomotaka Takeuchi, whereas Takashi Takeuchi is his pen name. Not sure when this was taken, but he seems to be healthy. In 2002, Type Moon released a book called Colorful Moon Tsukihime, which contained a demo for Melty Blood, as well as this amazingly retro 3D movie. This would have made for a solid opening to a PS1 fighter. It's easy to laugh at CG, but I can tell this took a lot of effort for its time. Doujin refers to any sort of fan-made media, not just books. There are a number of cool-looking Fate Doujin games that have been made over the years. Here's a visual novel called Fake Ever Since. This one's a 2D fighter called Fate Sword Dance. I remember seeing this game's assets repurposed for the crossover engine Mugen. Japanese copyright really hates YouTube videos, but fan-made stuff like this is really popular over there. Fatal Zero Action is a Muso-styled hack-and-slash game. I had no idea I could have played as Saber like this prior to Fate Extella. It takes place around Fate Zero, letting you control Saber, Kiritsugu, and Iskandar. The game was sold at Japan's Comiket 82 convention. Crucius Fatal Fake is a 3D fighter that looks like a more primitive version of Unlimited Codes. It's cool that it lets you play tag team between a master and servant. The game uses unofficial voice acting, which is weird given how Seiyu almost never change roles. It can't be helped in this case, and it does sound pretty legit. There's a Dota 2 arcade mod called Fate Another. I've never actually played a MOBA before though. Lastly, we have the tactics RPG Battle Moon Wars. I remember trying this on a livestream, but I never finished it. The sprite work is adorable. Out of all the games here, this has gotta be my favorite, and you can play it in English. In 2001, Takeuchi collaborated with Kirihara Kotori on a manga called Tsukihime Hiyori. It's just a cute little spin-off that's only 10 pages. That same year, fans who ordered Tsukihime by mail received little comic leaflets called Tsukihime Tsushin. Some more cute bonus items for those who happened to support the studio back in the day. In order to create fan translations, Fate Stay Night was obviously patched so that you didn't need a physical CD to play it. However, the trial edition of Stay Night lists an unofficial no-CD patch that is no longer available. I guess that's kinda cool. In 2007, the Fate Stay Night visual novel was converted into a physical book called Fate Stay Night Visual Story. Not only did it cover the entire narrative, but it also has extra commentary and concept art. I can't imagine how dummy thick that thing's gotta be. Huh, not sure why this one's so deep, but whatever. Lil Nas dressed up in some crazy golden armor and then tweeted the photos online alongside a picture of Gilgamesh. Apparently, the dude's also a Type Moon fan whose birthday is close to Gilga's. In response, Sony Music of Japan posted an illustration of Gilgamesh, wishing him a happy birthday. This next one's honestly its own rabbit hole, but Fate Grand Order is facing various accusations of plagiarism pertaining to the servant profiles listed in the game. It started when a user on Twitter pointed out that Dioscuri's profile is lifted letter for letter from a translated version of Homer's original Greek writing. While Homer's text is part of the public domain, this Japanese translation is not, which I think is pretty stupid. Nonetheless, Japanese Twitter went crazy debating whether FGO and its material books should cite their sources. I suppose it's a tricky situation. Do you think translators should be able to claim copyright over translations of ancient stories? Due to a severe lack of confirmed photos, some fans speculate whether Nasu and Takeuchi really are who they say they are, two guys who went to school together. Among the rumor mill is the silly idea that the two of them are in fact one person. It's not hard for these sorts of rumors to spread without photographic evidence. Nasu never shows his face, instead representing himself as a cute little mushroom guy. However, fans believe they've found what is a picture of the back of Nasu's head. It comes from a rare issue of Mephisto magazine, showing Nasu speaking with fellow author Yukito Ayatsuji. Even if it's true, it doesn't really leave us with much to go on. Remember how I said that Dean Stay Night never included Saber's epilogue from Rialta Nua? Well, it turns out that UFO Table animated the last episode, but the only way to see it is to go to the now defunct Type Moon Museum. We've got these screenshots, but that's about it. Hopefully, one day they release it to the public, ideally as part of a proper remake of the Fate route. A guy can dream. That wraps up Epoch Speech's Iceberg, leaving us with only one more tier at a depth of 9. Everything's pitch black. Don't be surprised if you find an anglerfish chomping on your face. Along with the non-existent Tsukihime anime, JC staff released an OVA called Tsukihime Prologue, which provides important visuals and text detailing the true ancestors and Arcuade's meeting with Zelrech as a child. Needless to say, Nasu's a maniac. In 1985, there was a horror RPG released on the PC Engine called The Screamer. Apparently, Nasu wrote a fanfic manga of this game without actually playing it. No idea how he pulled that off. Maybe he just liked the aesthetic. Around the same time, Takeuchi released one of his first manga, a doujin called Sina. He later put out an informational book called Information Volume 1 that has a collaboration between Sina and Nasu's Screamer fanfic. It's worth noting that the reason so little is actually known about these works is because they're extremely rare. Very few copies were ever sold at events, and when they're sold on auction through stores like Mandarake, the bids can go as high as $10,000. Extreme Type Moon fans have made it their mission to collect these pre-Tsukihime comics, and this collection includes works like U-God, Maid Sanwa Majo, Lucky Maid S, and the awesome-looking Valkyria series. There's a 1996 manga called F that won Takeuchi an award, but we don't even have a cover for that one. The same goes for a manga he made in 1997 called Yushabu Tadaima Katsudo Uchu. He got it published in a magazine, but wasn't able to continue it as a series. It's yet another rare comic hardly anyone has ever seen. Some of Nasu's written works are also so obscure that we only know of them by name. Between the two artists, we've heard of Demon Hunting, Wish, Two Heart, and The World Around Us is Full of Demons. All of them are now considered lost media due to their limited convention releases that occurred well before Nasu and Takeuchi gained a major following. This is why it's so important to issue reprints for desired books. DNA Media, for instance, publishes anthology collections of various manga, including manga for the Fate series. Apparently not many people know about them. Oh, we've already discussed Battle Moon Wars, so let's move on to Natural Tomato. In 1999, Takeuchi made a Soul Calibur doujinshi called Natural Tomato. It's listed as 18+, but I wasn't able to see any scans. Damn it. As a tie-in for their film adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works, Studio Dean released a 2-hour recap of their anime series called Fate's Day Night TV Reproduction. It featured a new opening animation, as well as new credits songs. The end credits for Carnival Phantasm shows a massive scrolling parade of the show's cast. At the very end, however, we see Saber reaching out to a hand peeking from the edge of the frame. Whose hand is that? Some fans speculate it might be Fate Prototype's Ayaka Sajo as a tie-in to the Fate Prototype OVA release, as well as how the show ends with her calling on Enerba. This theory isn't at all confirmed, though. Huh, would you look at that? I already covered the Apocrypha MMO. Let's move on to Red Dragon. The classic anime franchise Record of Lodoss War was written based on the transcripts from the creator's tabletop RPG sessions. Makoto Sanda, who was part of that initial team, thought it would be a great idea to try this method of writing once more. He gathered together various creators, including Nasu and Gen Urobuchi, to play and record their tabletop sessions. These have been fashioned into a series of books and an RPG called Red Dragon. It's now possible to experience Nasu role-playing this blonde guy named Swallow Kratzbai. The anime Chaos Dragon is based on Red Dragon as well. I've gotta say, this gives new meaning to the Type Moon Lodoss War collab CD they worked on. Turns out, as a student, Nasu wrote his own tabletop scenarios, one of which being a pen and paper RPG called Tetsu no Monsho, or Iron Emblem. There exists an extremely obscure Tsukihime fan game, a spin-off called Makai Gekko, Executors and Evil Spirits. It honestly looks like a ROM hack of a Sega Genesis title. Mangaka Sasaki Shonen created a one-shot Tsukihime manga for Kamiket 99. It's a cute little 8-page story with Shiki and Arcuade. It's been translated by Tsukihimates, and presumably, more content will be released over time. Shoujo Eraser is a nickname fans have given to part of Nasu and Takeuchi's biography. In junior high, Nasu forgot to bring his eraser to class, so he asked Takeuchi for one. That's how their Type Moon journey started, as well as why fans jokingly ship their bromance. An Adventure of First Love is a short story for Mahotsukai no Yoru that was packaged with the game's separate art book. It follows Sojuro and his male classmates, Ichigozuka and Mino, the latter of whom has a crush on Aoko. They wind up digging into Aoko's past, learning about her very first encounter with love. It was translated into English by Ghost47 on Beast's Lair. Given that it takes place after the events in the game, it's a fun little epilogue that sadly wasn't bundled with the HD remaster. I'll link that translation in the description. Vampire Wars is a novel series released in 1982. When the books were reprinted in 2004, Takeuchi illustrated the cover art for the new release. I like how the girl is basically Saber with long hair. No, seriously, I'm into that. 316 Jiken is a rare book Nasu published in 2011. It contains 2 short stories. The first is called Sora no Soto, and it's a spin-off of his other work, DDD, which I mentioned earlier. His second story is called Magnituning, which he wrote to accompany an illustration done by Shuji Enomoto. Like any rich series, the Nasuverse has its fair share of fan theories and interpretations, some of which are mistakenly shared around as canon. Such notions include Shiro not remembering his birth parents, the Counterforce trying to destroy Shiro's projections, CL being born during medieval times, Gaia calling the types to attack humanity, Jesus ending the Age of Gods, and that Shiro was glad Mitsuzuri got molested because it reminded her to be feminine. Some of these claims are straight up false, while others are unclear, but the fanon draws a premature conclusion. It's really cool to read through these, so I'll link them below. Kara no Kyokai has a handful of rare doujins that are tricky to track down. They've been published under different companies such as Magiku 4-Koma, Dengeki Comics, and New Border. Compared to some of those other works, though, you can get these on eBay reasonably cheap. Nasu has a legit problem making straightforward sequels. One would expect Fate Extella to be a direct continuation of Fate Extra, and for most players it might as well be. On a now defunct blog post, however, Nasu clarified that Extra takes place after an alternate version of the Mooncell Grail War. He wanted to publish it as a proper book or something, but instead decided to just toss this important backstory onto an obscure website. Personally, I don't think it's that important, in the same way that Nasu has his own unwritten ideas for Fate Zero. The post itself may be gone, but a user on GameFAQs summarized the prologue Extella comes from. That'll be in the description as well. The upcoming continuation of the Tsukihime remake, The Other Side of Red Garden, was initially planned to be called The Other Side of the Moon, according to an unused file on the disc. Near side, far side, Red Garden, who cares? I just hope we'll get to see Kohaku suckling on Akiha's boob. A few years ago, someone uploaded a strange video to YouTube titled Emiya UBW Theme. It was auto-generated content, but what made it strange was that it had Kakyoin from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure on the thumbnail. The video went sorta viral for a while before being deleted. It's now lost media. The very last entry in this entire iceberg has to do with the visual novel Loveless, Owaranai Monogatari. It came out the exact same week as Tsukihime, and yet somehow, Nasu Kunihiro, Nasu's real name, is listed under the game's credits on the visual novel database. Did Nasu really work on both games simultaneously? That seems impossible according to all of his interviews. Adding to the mystery is that Loveless was released by the same group that published Angel Voice, where Nasu first submitted his story notes. In theory, he could have only contributed a tiny bit and still got honored in the credits, so it's not the hardest thing to believe. That brings us to the end of the ultimate Type Moon iceberg, at least as of recording this video. Again, thanks to Tohazure and Epoch Speech for making their respective charts. This was an insanely educational journey for me, and I hope you all got just as much out of it as I did. What is your favorite entry in the video? Do you have any special information that I didn't include? Let me hear all of your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: Video Gamer 75, Elise Trash for Skinko, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Olympian Doll, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, King Kobo, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Jonathan Badua, The Taz 96, President Irina Vladimirovna Putina, Maxwell's Demon, Kengo X77, SF Giants Fan Mike, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.